Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. Do you want a successful garden? Before planting, then, you need to do some planning. And if it's a first garden, you really need to do a lot of planning, but it's not overwhelming. It is necessary, though, for a productive garden of food and flowers. Today, America's favorite retired college horticulture professor, Debbie Flower, and myself offer tips for your first garden. Tips that will save you a lot of time and money in your pursuit of getting your family the healthiest food possible, as well as the most colorful flowers to attract some garden help in your battle against the bad bugs. Today, it's episode 307, The First Garden. We have tips. We're podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon jungle in suburban Purgatory. It's the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, brought to you today by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Let's go. Always a pleasure to welcome Debbie Flower, America's favorite college horticultural professor, into the Abutilon jungle here at Barking Dog Studios to talk gardening with us. Today we're going to tackle your first garden. What are some tips for establishing a first garden? But I'd like to establish some of Debbie's credentials. I mean, what does it take to become America's favorite college horticultural professor? Well, let's delve into her RateMyProfessor.com comments that her students left her a few years ago at the college she was teaching at the time. And she received a 100% rating of students who said would take it again from you. So congratulations on that. Your level of difficulty was 2.5. I don't know if
out of 10.
What's
the rate?
I have no idea what it is, or your gymnastic skills. I'm not sure. Anyway, some of the comments. One writes, such a knowledgeable person of the field. I learned so much from her. She always clarified in a clear manner that could be understood, in my opinion, by any mind. Sad that she retired because I can't take a class with her again, but excited for her as a person for the freedom to work on her garden and explore the world. And hang around the Abutilon jungle, too.
Right. This is part of the world.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And another says, Debbie is a great professor. She explains everything very well. There were things that I didn't know. I really enjoyed her class. Another gives you an A+ and says, Professor Flower is amazing. She is a plant expert and conveys her passion for horticulture to the class. She is very organized. Everything we did all semester was in the syllabus. If you do the work and study for the exams, you should do well. But if you miss a class, you're going to miss a lot of information. Another says, she's great. She has an infinite number of years of experience.
I'm old.
And I'm fairly sure she knows everything you ever wanted to know about anything in the horticulture field. But please do not take this class if you are simply looking for an easy A. There is homework. And it's always a packed class, so save some space for the horticulture enthusiasts.
Take that.
There, yeah. And another says, a truly amazing teacher, very dedicated and devoted to the field. Another says, if you didn't love plants before, you will now. She's a great teacher. And another wrote, the good part is she's easy. I hate horticulture, but it's not her fault. I just always never really liked it. I mean, really? Plant business? WTF? The bad side is she is obsessed with plants. Yeah, she's a hort teacher.
Yeah, that's the way it goes.
Yeah. Also, she says, I did good on all her tests, but the final is different. And another warns, too, to take this class elsewhere for an easier A. And she spends too much time walking.
I walk when I talk, yes.
Okay.
But you see me here. I need to move. I use my hands.
Yeah, I brought you a fiddle wire over there in the corner.
It. Yes,
yeah,
I have to move when I'm doing things.
There's a fiddle wire in the corner for you.
Thank you.
So anyway, somebody responded to that comment that you spend too much time walking and take this class elsewhere for an easier A. And somebody responded, well, if you're into plants, this is the course to take and professor to teach it. Come on, her name is Flower. Yeah.
Yeah, it's my real name.
Yeah, so there you go. So your students loved you.
Oh, thank you.
There you go. And we love you here, too.
Thank you.
All right. Where are we? Oh, the first garden.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do you do? First thing I did when I established my first garden, because I didn't know jack about gardening way back when, back in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's see. We'll just clear out some of this Bermuda grass and plant stuff.
Oh.
It was a beautiful garden.
Bermuda grass garden.
Well, yeah, I was in there a lot, pulling out the Bermuda grass as it was growing in there. But I think because it was just a lawn before, the soil had never been touched.
Yeah.
So it was just, and I didn't think this at the time. I had no idea. But all the plants, it was like a jungle. It was like a tomato and pepper jungle. And I go, hey, this gardening stuff is easy. Then, like in the next year, I did the same thing. It doesn't look so great this year. And by the third year, it's, I don't know about this. Maybe I'll build raised beds. And so I built raised beds. And then eventually, I got more knowledgeable and all that. But I guess for the first garden, if I knew now what I knew back then, and I was starting a first garden, and actually I got to do that here. When we moved here 6-7 years ago, 8 years ago, I said, we can plant in pots for the time being, but let's just live with this place for a year and see where the sun goes. Let's see where the water goes.
Very good.
Where is the shade? Where is the sun? And it works. As long as you keep track of where the sun is, you can figure out which areas will get the most sun, because those instructions about plants liking full sun or part shade or full shade are kind of important.
Yes, they are. And you can get very academic about it and read about it. And they'll say, there's less sun on the north side and there's less sun on the east side, and it's cooler sun. That's a misnomer, but on the east side. But that's not always true.
Yeah. And a lot of people plant too much too soon.
Yes.
Too, when they get to it.
Start simple. Your point about the first garden, you removed the grass and it grew very well, is I've experienced more than once. And I think that's very true, because the soil has not been depleted of its nutrients. The plants do very well that first year. And I think the hardest part about gardening over and over and over again in the same place is replenishing your nutrition.
If you hear me say feed your soil, this is what gardening is all about. It's about everything. It's about the soil. It's about replenishing the soil. It's about replenishing the nutrients that are in the soil, because it's not fertilizer that's feeding your plants. It has to feed the soil first.
Right. And think about a forest. Does anybody go in that forest and spread fertilizer? No.
Bears.
Yes, there is some of that. You're right. Animals and whoever's living in the soil, like worms, that are living off of the plant debris that's falling to the ground. So the plants are dropping their own mulch, dropping their leaves and dead branches and such, which is mulching around their base. The microorganisms and the macroorganisms, like worms, are coming in and eating that, and then they poop. Everything poops, even microorganisms, and their poop becomes nutrition for the plants to then use to grow.
As our friend, organic gardener and expert Steve Zion would say, it's the poop loop.
Yes, it is the poop loop. He's absolutely true.
And that's how things grow, ladies and gentlemen. It's just the way it is. One of the things, you have to ask yourself a lot of questions before you turn that first shovel full of soil and you're going to plant a summer vegetable garden. What does your family eat?
Right. And so my vegetable garden has become smaller and smaller because my husband eats fewer and fewer vegetables.
How do you feel about that?
And I love vegetables, but, there's always the farmer's market. So, picking, like you said, you need to observe the area around you. A vegetable garden needs full sun, meaning unobstructed sun for a minimum of 6 hours a day during the growing season. It can be longer hours of sun that are maybe interrupted a little bit by some shade from a tree above or something, but minimum of 6 hours unobstructed sun. You want to start small. So you're going to talk to those who are going to eat from your garden, find out what they like, and grow a few crops.
One thing you've done is you've reduced the size of your vegetable garden, though, is you enjoy flowers. After all, her name is Flower. And that's nice, too.
I do. The rest of what I've turned to in my garden, yours is full of edible raised beds for edibles. And that's one way of doing it. I've reduced mine to one 4x8 raised bed, and I plant some stuff around the base of it. Not right next to it, but in that area of the yard, right into the ground as well. but I like to plant for nature, for the birds and the insects, and watch them come and be part of my environment.
The whole trick to eliminating or reducing the amount of chemicals used to control pests in the yard is basically surfing with Mother Nature and putting in a lot of plants that attract the beneficials, that attract the pollinators to your yard. And they're pretty flowers.
Mm-hmm. They are. And I have spent some days outside sitting under a sunflower and just watching who comes and goes, just because it's fun.
Yeah, I do that with the California buckwheat. I sit out there on the brick wall and watch them flit about and see if I can identify them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There's so many of them, it's difficult.
Right.
And that's the idea. You bring in the good guys and they can help you control the bad guys. And that's very important. The design of the garden is very important too, in that you need room to walk between your plants without stepping in the area where the plants are. And so that means wide pathways. Mm-hmm. And not crowding plants together.
Spacing plants. The number one error I see in new gardeners' gardens is that they plant plants too close together. They're cute. They're small when I get them at the nursery. What you need to know is how big are they going to get when they're mature. Mm-hmm. And you want to plant them so they have enough space to get mature without touching the plant next to them. Because if you touch, it looks nice when you touch the plant next to them, but that allows water and bad insects to get trapped, water causing fungus and bacteria to develop in the plant, and the bad insects are protected from the good insects. And so you start to have problems in your plants when they're too close together.
You got too much shade, you got less wind, so you have more disease issues. You also have more hiding places for the bad guys, too. So, yeah. And those instructions are usually on the seed packet or on the stick that came with the vegetable plant that you bought as far as spacing in the garden. Mm-hmm. And it could be, for tomatoes, I like 36 inches of space between tomatoes. For peppers, 18 inches.
Right.
Squash, good luck.
It takes off.
Yeah, it takes off, but you could get away with one.
And you plant it near an edge, not right in the corner, but I like to plant it in the corner and let it go over the side and take off down. So I'm still giving it nutrition in the raised bed, but it's growing away from the raised bed.
Then there's the age-old question, okay, which ways do I run my raised beds, east, west, or north, south?
It depends on your latitude, where you are between the north and south poles. Where we are at about...
Halfway.
No, halfway is Salem, Oregon.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay, here in the Northern Hemisphere.
In the Northern Hemisphere, right.
That's good to know.
Yeah. I did this exercise, and I'm trying to remember with my students, I did this exercise, the answer. It doesn't matter where we live. We're about 25.
I think
a little
37.
Further. Yeah, a little further north than that, yes. And we can position our beds either way and get enough light on all the plants. Sun rises in the east, sets in the west. It's only overhead right at June 21st or 20th. Mm-hmm. And then it's in the southern sky. And so if you are in Minnesota, where my son is, and you plant your beds east to west, then the plants on the southern side are going to get more sun than on the northern. Well, that's okay if you put your taller guys on the northern side of the bed and your short guys on the southern side of the bed.
So there's your planting tip. If you are going to put in fruit trees, you'd want the fruit trees on the north side of your garden area so they won't be casting shade on your raised beds if the plants you're going to put in there require full sun. But we have a problem in the 21st century, and that's too much sun, too much heat. And I'm beginning to think that, I think tomatoes here at least would benefit, and peppers too, to avoid sun-scald problems and just premature death. Give them some afternoon shade.
Right, and your yard is set up for that because you have your property slopes to the east, down to the east, and your house is on the west side, and it's a tall house. So as the sun is setting, your beds in the back are starting to get shade.
Yep. The beds that are closest to the house will start being in full shade by 2 o'clock in the afternoon or so.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's 6, the sun comes up, it's in the sky by 6 in the morning. That's your 6 hours.
Yeah. The other thing, too, I remember when we lived out in the country, when I had basically a bare landscape. Okay, I'm going to do it from scratch. Let's see what happens. Mm-hmm. And so I, put in my raised beds, maybe 50 feet from the house. And then about 50 feet beyond the raised beds to the south, I planted young trees, oak trees, some scarlet oaks and red oaks. And
they get big.
In 15 years, yes, the raised beds that were closest to the trees and still 50 feet away were getting afternoon shade from those 40, 50-foot tall trees. So consider the trees. And this is why I like to say, live with the yard for a full year. Take regular pictures of your yard.
Pictures are wonderful.
On a seasonal basis or on a monthly basis at different times of the day, 9 a.m., noon, 4 o'clock. And do that on a regular basis so you can see, well, just how much sun does that area get on a month-to-month basis? And you'll have a better idea of where the full sun really is.
You've decided where to plant. You're going to have to prepare the soil. You don't necessarily want to rent a tiller and till it up massively. You just need to remove all the weeds. If you have the time to solarize it a year ahead of time, that would be great, but that means you're planning a year out. It takes a growing season out of your time, but solarizing is a very effective way to kill not just the weeds you see, but the seeds that are in the top 4 to 6 inches of the soil, assuming you have prepped the soil, meaning you've roughened it up and watered it, and then you put your clear plastic down in the hottest part of the year for 6 weeks, ideally. Times I've done it, the plastic breaks down before that, but till the plastic breaks down, and then you remove it, and everything in the top 4 to 6 inches will be dead. So the first thing you plant will take over.
But that goes back to living with it for the first year. You could do that in your first year. Solarize the soil. I think that's a great idea to do that, just to kill off anything that you didn't want. Let's say you had a Bermuda grass lawn. Well, if you mow it really, really short in May and early June, and then give it a lot of water, and then put the plastic down, clear plastic. It's usually 2 mil plastic. It could be a roll of painter's plastic from the big Home Depot or Lowe's store, or a little bit thicker. You don't want to go too thick, maybe 4 mil of that clear plastic, but seal down the edges. You have to almost dig a trench around the border, bring the clear plastic into that trench and secure it with boards or rocks so that air or
soil.
Yeah. So that air cannot get underneath that plastic cover. And if the wind gets under it, it could rip it much easier.
Right. Energy from the sun itself will break down plastic. And that's how I was losing mine. I did bury my edges, and that you're doing that to trap the heat. What's happening is the sun is going through the plastic as sun, hitting the soil and turning into heat, which is what happens to sun. When sun comes through your living room window, very bright, hits your floor, it becomes hot. It's a hot floor. Your cat likes to lie there. That's how it's happening. Now that's happening under the plastic, and the plastic is trapping that heat, and it heats up to over 140 degrees, which is the temperature at which living cells die. So you can solarize. If you don't have the time to solarize, you want this garden now, you want it this year, clear the soil, rough it up a little bit, loosen it, water it, and allow things to germinate. Treat it like it's a garden already. Water it regularly. You're going to get the weed seeds that are at the surface to germinate. Go through and take them out, maybe with a reciprocating hoe. You don't want to dig deeply anymore. Every time you dig deep and bring new soil up, you're bringing up more seeds. You just want to kill what's on the surface. A reciprocating hoe will cut them at surface level. Do it again. Water, treat it like a garden. Let them germinate again. Cut them off again. It'll probably, and a third time, do it a third time. This will be a 3 to 5 week process if the weather is right for seed germination. And then you've gotten rid of a lot of your weed problems.
And this goes back to if you're solarizing the soil, is like I mentioned, you want to water the soil thoroughly first, because as that sun hits the clear plastic, that warmth will go down deeper. The water will take it down deeper.
Right. Water can absorb more heat than air can. That's a chemical thing.
That's a chemical thing, but it works.
It works. Yeah.
And one option too is put plants that you want that first year in pots, and just do a big container garden for the first year, and then realize where the sun is. And the beauty of using some lightweight pots like smart pots is maybe you don't know where the sun and shade is going to be. You can at least pick them up and move them.
Or put them on rolling bases. But use big pots.
Yeah.
Because the pots are a more stressful environment. to grow for the plant and for you to maintain the plant because it's a limited amount of media in the root zone. It heats up quickly, it cools off quickly, it accepts water quickly, and it dries out quickly. You have to spend a lot more time out there watering and weeding and taking care, fertilizing. The roots can't go as far to get nutrients. So it's a more intensive type of gardening. The bigger the pot, more those problems are reduced.
Yeah, less stress on the plant. The benefit, too, of having those big pots is you can use a potting mix, a soil mix, to start off with. We should be dissuading people from filling those pots with their native soil.
Right.
Because what's in that native soil? Weeds.
Right. Lots of live things that could harm your plant. And also the water relations of field soil are very different than container soil. Mm-hmm. And you need the water relations to be correct for the container, thus you use container soil.
Right. And again, going back to pathways, I would make your pathways at least 4 feet wide so you can take wheelbarrows through without compacting the soil around the plants. What area of the plant roots, as it spreads out, would you want to be, if you will, a demilitarized zone that you don't want to be stepping on and not compacting the soil? 2 feet? A foot?
Well, it depends on the plant, I think. Yeah. You know, how big is that plant?
Yeah, most vegetable roots don't get that spread out.
Right. They don't have the time, for one thing. It's just an annual plant. In an ornamental garden, if it's very deep, I call them gardener's paths, and they're just big enough for me to walk through. Mm-hmm. And I mulch them heavily, which helps distribute weight so that I'm not harming roots as much. Wood mulch is good for paths for that reason, for many reasons, but that's one of them. I think you could do the same for vegetable garden. You could make every other, if you had a whole bunch of raised beds next to each other, so it looked like a couple of long lines, 4 long lines, let's say, you could have a 4-foot path on one side and a very narrow path on the other side of that raised bed between that one and the next one, then another 4-foot path, so you can get the wheelbarrow to just one side of the raised bed.
Did we mention why you don't want to compact the soil?
No.
No, well, we should.
Yeah.
Yeah. Air will disappear if you do that. And for some reason, roots like air.
Roots like air. Yeah. They have to do respiration, it's called. Plants make food and they store it in their pantry, which is all over the plants. In the stem, it's in the leaves, it's in the roots, it's everywhere. And when they need to do something, anything, they need to eat. And so they go through a process called respiration, which is they get one of those food packets and they break it down so they can use the food. Roots store food and they do respiration to break it down so that they can grow new roots.
I'm pretty picky about who I allow to advertise on this podcast. My criteria, though, is pretty simple. It has to be a product I like, a product I use, and a product I would buy again. And you know who checks all those boxes? It's Smart Pots. Smart Pots is the oldest and still the best of all the fabric plant containers that you might find. Smart Pots are sold around the world, and they're proudly made 100% right here in the USA. Smart Pots come in a wide array of sizes and colors and can be reused year after year. Some models even have handles, and that makes them a lot easier to move around the yard. Because the fabric breathes, Smart Pots are better suited than plastic pots, especially for hot climates. That breathable fabric has other benefits too. Water drainage issues? Not with Smart Pots. Roots that go round and round choking the root ball like they do in plastic pots? Doesn't happen with Smart Pots. These benefits will help you get a bigger, better plant than what you've gotten in the past with the same size plastic or other hard container. Smart Pots are available at independent garden centers as well as select Ace and True Value hardware stores nationwide. To find a store near you or to buy online, visit smartpots.com/Fred. And don't forget that /Fred part. On that page are details about how, for a limited time, you can get 10% off your Smart Pot order by using the coupon code FRED, F-R-E-D. Use it at checkout from the Smart Pot store. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of Smart Pots lightweight, colorful, award-winning fabric containers. And don't forget that special Farmer Fred 10% discount. Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planter. Go to smartpots.com/Fred. There is a sentiment that gardeners sometimes endure especially first-time gardeners. And that's sort of an exhaustion from garden. And it usually happens sometime in late summer where they're tired of harvesting. They're tired of eating.
And the weather is getting less conducive to being outside and enjoying puttering.
Mm-hmm. So you have to sort of motivate yourself to get out there. And one way is the placement of the garden.
Mm-hmm.
Like you've tangled with landscapers on this one.
Right. When I first designed my yard, it came partially with some vegetation, but the landscaper wanted to put the vegetable garden in a place where I couldn't see it from the house. And I said, absolutely not. I need to be able to see it so that I know what's going on out there. I can't see it from many places. I can see it from my bedroom and I can see it from my patio. And that's enough. But I need to know that like last summer, the irrigation timer broke.
Yeah, you want to see some browning leaves.
You want to know that things like that happen so that you can fix them before you lose everything.
Yeah, ideally, it should be visible from the kitchen window.
Yes.
To remind you to go out there and pick or see what's there and just...
plan dinner. Oh, look, the asparagus is ready. We'll have that tonight.
The healthiest food you can eat is the food you grow yourself, said that guy. And it's true.
And the tastiest.
Yeah, and the tastiest, too. The freshest food. The next best option, like you mentioned earlier, is a farmer's market.
Right.
And that's the greatest way I know of is to taste what the real taste of food is, not something that's been sitting in a refrigerator for months, like some fruits do, but something that was picked that morning.
Right.
Yeah. If you're curious about what to grow, that's the other thing is visit farmers markets.
Or join a CSA, a community-supported agriculture, where you get delivery of a certain amount of vegetation, edible vegetation, fruits and vegetables.
Well, but, some flowers are edible, too.
Yes, they are.
So
I have books about that.
Yeah, yeah. Watering your garden. That's important.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be lugging a hose 50, 60, 70 feet.
Right.
So when you're planting your garden, you want it to be near a watering source.
Yes.
Or to set it up ahead of time if you're going to build raised beds by putting in drip irrigation systems and hooked up to a faucet or its own valve and on a timer.
Right. Or both. You set it up near a faucet and then that faucet can become the source of water for that drip system that will fit into your raised bed.
Watering is not an event you set by a calendar.
Right.
Watering is an event that you set up based on the day's weather and the week's weather and the consistency of your soil. Raised beds tend to drain a lot quicker. They also drain a lot narrower. If you have heavy clay soil, that water tends to spread out and can cover the entire root zone of a plant. It might be 18 inches wide, that footprint, as it descends into the heavy clay soil. In a raised bed, that soil is so loose that that cylinder of the water footprint, if you will, might only be 8 inches wide.
Or even less if it's like a carrot. It could be like a carrot shape.
Yeah.
If the media is very open.
So don't skimp on emitters if you're putting in a raised bed. Take a look at some good information about drip irrigation systems and garden layouts. One of the best I know is a drip irrigation company called DripWorks that's based here in California. You can go to dripworks.com and they have plans and information and very good tutorials about setting up a drip irrigation system in a garden.
And you and I use different types of irrigation in our raised beds. I like a spray irrigation because it allows me, it's a micro spray, but it allows me to plant anywhere in the bed. You use the tortuous path emitter that's embedded every 6 inches or a foot in the tube, so it emits water only at that location.
It's a good name for a band, Tortuous Path Emitter.
I use the tortuous path emitters in my landscape, but I don't use them in my raised beds.
And remember, too, that the listed gallons per minute on emitters may not be true if you don't have the pressure or you are running the lines too long. And a lot of people like to use that 1/4-inch tubing, which is really small. And if you've got emitters spaced on those 1/4-inch lines a foot apart, you're only going to get that 1 gallon per hour release based on a maximum run of 17 feet.
Right. I did mine at 10.
10, okay.
And I had supply lines at both ends in case something happens in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. If you're going to run 1/4-inch tubing around your plants in sort of a spiral fashion, have it come off a main line, a 1/2-inch line, and limit your runs. But we're getting into a whole different topic
Yes,
here.
we are.
But it's important to know. And that's why, purchasing a moisture meter is not a bad idea.
Right, but you got to learn how to use it. So
That's right.
You need to calibrate it. You need to go out to your raised bed when it's dry, stick that moisture meter in and see where it reads, then soak the raised bed and let it drain and stick that moisture meter back in to the same depth and see where it reads. Moisture meters really read electrical conductivity. If you then did a third test, added a bunch of ammonium sulfate to the surface, watered it in, or chicken manure would be another source, watered it in, let it drain, and put it in a third time, it would read wetter than it did the second time. And that's because it has more salts in it, and the salts come from fertilizers.
And again, we should reinforce that weeding never ends.
That's true.
You do it before, you do it during, you do it after.
And try to get them when they're young. Mm-hmm. I taught my students BIS, before it sets seed. Pull the weed before it sets seed. Because weeds are weeds, in part because they produce lots and lots of seeds which successfully germinate when they find a new place to grow.
One of the things we should stress, though, that if you are planting from seed and you've got the little sprouts coming up and you see weeds popping around, maybe instead of pulling those weeds out where it might disturb the soil of that new plant that you want to keep, you may want to just cut off the top.
Right. Right. If you never gardened before and you are direct seeding, you might want to put a few seeds in a pot indoors and care for them just to see what the seedling looks like.
Oh, yeah.
So when you go out, yes, when you go out to the garden bed, you know which one is the desirable plant.
And start off with something easy and dramatic, especially if you have kids, like a sunflower plant.
Yes.
Sunflowers, they grow quickly. If you're looking for a real quick vegetable to grow, and you can use it as a marker plant, I'll explain that, use radish seeds, because radishes germinate in, 10 days?
Yeah.
Something like that.
And they're done in 20, 30 probably.
Right. But you can use those radish sprouts to remind you that, that's where I planted the carrots too, because the carrots might take 3 weeks to show up.
Yes, and they have tiny seeds.
Yeah. So if you want to do that, you can. But basically start with training wheel plants that grow quickly. And the beauty of a vegetable garden, they're usually annuals.
Right.
So there's not that much care with them. Now, if you're growing something like asparagus, which is a perennial, you need to learn how to care for asparagus.
Yes, you do.
I don't think I would... If I was a first-time gardener, I don't know if I'd want to start off with asparagus.
I wouldn't.
No. For one thing, if you planted it as a focal point of your garden, it's damn ugly during the summer.
It is.
Yes, it's just
and it's
a bunch
kind of pokey, too.
It's pokey and ferny and just...
Beans are good with kids.
Yeah.
Corn. I planted corns with my younger son and his friends one summer, and you have to plant corn in a mass, not in a row, for it to pollinate and create corn kernels.
They still need separation, though.
They need separation, yes.
Like 6 inches.
Right,
yeah.
But not a row. You need a minimum of 3 by 3.
Right, a square.
A square, yes. And that's a really small minimum. And they were probably 6th graders. So how old is a 6th grader?
12.
10, 12, something like that. And those boys came back wanting to see their corn.
Yeah, I don't blame them.
Yeah.
That's why I grow popcorn.
Got them interested.
But it's dramatic. All right. You want to start the backyard fruit and nut orchard of your dreams, but maybe you don't know where to begin. Or maybe you're currently growing fruit and nut trees and you've got a million questions, such as what are the tastiest fruits to grow? Where can I go to buy some of these delectable fruit and nut trees you've been reading about? And then how do you care for all of these trees, including planting, pruning, and harvesting? I've got one online stop in mind for you where all these questions you might have will get answered. It's DaveWilson.com. That's Dave Wilson Nursery, the nation's largest wholesaler of fruit and nut trees for the backyard garden. They have planting tips, taste test results, and links to nurseries in your area that carry Dave Wilson fruit trees. Click on the Home Garden tab at DaveWilson.com for all of these links, including a link to their years of informative videos about growing fruit and nut trees that they've posted on the Dave Wilson Nursery YouTube channel. Start the backyard orchard of your dreams at DaveWilson.com. You've always stressed that cucumbers are easy to grow from seed. I mean, if you're looking for dramatic plants that grow quickly, it's hard to beat zucchini.
Right. But you also want something they're going to be willing to eat.
Yeah.
Now, if you talk it up, they'll eat it. Oh, you grew that. You're going to love it. They'll eat it. But consider that if you have a very picky eater and you're trying to garden with them, choose something that you can get them to eat.
One thing that you've always said about a garden is spend time in your garden.
Oh, yeah.
Walk it every day.
Yeah.
Get out there. Become friends with your plants.
Yep.
Check the leaves. Check under the leaves.
Yes.
Talk to them. Yeah. Pull weeds.
Yes. I always carry pruning shears with me. Because if I don't, then I start breaking things. I walk the paths in the garden. There are certain places where I have dedicated paths, and they need to be kept open. My neighbor has a wisteria vine on the fence, which grows toward my property, so I'm often cutting there. So just for the health of the plants, I carry pruning shears with me. Sometimes I carry a bucket with me to put the prunings in. But you notice the beginning of an aphid problem, or in my case, the wisteria growing and twining up the plant on my side of the fence, the weed patch that's taking off, things you can deal with immediately. It only takes 10 minutes, and if you left it there, it would take you hours to fix later.
I often say mulch, 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 and that's true of the garden as well, because mulch, a natural mulch, an organic mulch of chipped and shredded tree branches, for example, does a whole host of good. It maintains soil moisture at a more even rate. It moderates soil temperatures as well. It inhibits weeds from forming, and as it breaks down, it feeds the soil.
Right. There are certain plants that will not survive in a heavily mulched soil. It creates an organic soil that holds moisture better than one that has less organic matter in it. And the plants I'm thinking of are drought-tolerant natives. If you don't care about drought-tolerant natives, mulch your whole yard. I have one little, we call it the hump, one little hill of soil that is not mulched in my yard. And I have some California natives growing on that. Things that need soil that dries out more quickly.
One of the downsides of using leaves as mulch is the fact it can kind of form a pretty solid mat that does make that soil just a little too wet, which is why I like to take the leaves that have fallen in November and put them in a metal trash can and stick my weed whacker down there and break them up into little pieces or run over them with a mulching mower, because those smaller leaf portions tend to break down quicker and feed the soil and don't necessarily form that thick mat.
Right. And put those around your plants, not on your paths. My husband, bless him, put them on the path and they stick to my shoes. Then I track them in the house. It's annoying. So put them around the plants and put the wood on the path.
So I hope he isn't listening, but I have a neighbor who made the very kind offer a year ago. Says, I've got this bale of straw. You want it? Yeah, I like straw as mulch. That's fine. I'll take it. And I took it. I broke it apart, the whole bale, big bale too, and spread it around on the walking areas and in some of the raised beds as well. Guess what? It's hay. It wasn't straw.
Oh, no.
Which means
it's full of seed.
It's full of seed, and it's germinating now. And if you'd like to join me in the backyard and pull these sprouts, you're more than welcome.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
Yeah. But it, too, can form not only a mat, but also, like you experience with leaves, it can stick to your feet, and you drag it in. I
had students tell me about using those bales of straw, however, not hay, as the sides of their raised beds. And the first year you can sit on them, you can put tools on them, and you fill in between with your media that you're going to grow your plants in. And then they leave them at the end of the first year and they start to break down. And then they would use them as mulch on top of the bed and get another set for another year.
We should mention things of convenience. And like you carry your shears with you out to the garden every time you go out. They're probably placed near the door that you normally exit to go to the yard.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's a good idea and a good habit to get into. Some people I know use old rural mailboxes on a post to store some of their smaller tools, and they have it right there in the garden so they can just reach in the old mailbox and pull out their shears and do that too. But have things handy so that you remember to do things.
To do them, yes.
Yeah. This begs the question, too, is how much time do you have for the garden? This isn't a instant, set it and forget it type experience.
No, it's not. These days I work in 2-hour shifts, so to speak. I'll go out and I don't time myself, but I find that after about 2 hours, I'm ready to go in, get a drink of water, take a break. And I'll do that. I'm probably only, at this time of year, I'm doing it once or twice a week, and that's all. So I'm spending 2 to 4 hours a week in the garden.
Yeah, well, we tend to automate the things we do so that you do have less work. But as any experienced gardener will tell you, you have a list of things to do when you go outside to do, and something else pops up that you see, and you get distracted. And, hours later when you're coming back in, you realize, I didn't go out there to do what I intended to do.
Right.
So you might want to write it down.
I do start a list, and that pushes me out the door.
Yeah.
I have one in my head right now for my yard. So, yes.
Also, keep a garden diary.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that means basically writing it down in some sort of book or keeping track of it on your handheld computer, just to remind you of what you planted, when you planted it, how it performed, because you think, I'll just put the little stick that it came with next to it and know what it is. Well, not necessarily. Those sticks disappear as the plant grows.
Yes, they do.
Snails
break.
move them. Yeah, they break. They disappear for whatever reason. So keep an interior record of what you've done in the garden. I have one book on my shelf. I have books. You know this? Notice that?
Yeah, I have books too.
I have shelves of books. And one of those books, I'm going to reach for it right here, comes from 1990, and it was just a blank calendar book for 1990. But I have used it to write down everything I did in the garden from 1990 to 2016.
Wow.
In here. And so I can tell you, like, for instance, back in, let's go to January. What did I do on this date in January back then? Ooh, good for me. In 1997, I planted a Fuyu persimmon tree.
Oh, wow.
This is the time of the year because bare root trees are usually available in California in January. I love the persimmon tree. Mm-hmm. I also planted a Canadria fig and a Black Mission fig. Wow, you were busy. I was busy, yeah. I also replaced a dead all-in-one almond tree.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, having a book like this not only serves as a record for what you've done, it serves as a reminder for maybe you've grown something successfully. And you mentioned that 20 years ago you wrote, I planted a Dr. Weish tomato. It was really good. Mm-hmm. And you forget about Dr. Weish and you've moved on, and then you go back to this book and you go, why haven't I planted the Dr. Weish again? I should do that.
Right.
Like any blank book that's a garden diary, it's jam-packed in April and May.
Right.
It's just filled with stuff.
As you call it, holiday season for the gardening industry.
Yes, Christmas time for nurseries, yes. Anyway, keep a garden diary. Do it in pencil. All right, so we've written it down. What else should we do for a first garden?
Well, let's see. We talked about weeding it, prepping the soil, spacing the plants correctly. Keep it simple.
Yeah. At first,
yeah. And put it in the right place.
I think, too, we should stress, if it's your first garden, choose the training wheel plants that are easy to grow with great results. Things like cherry tomatoes. Mm-hmm. You're going to get a lot of fruit quickly with cherry tomatoes. Varieties of vegetables that just grow quickly are dramatic and will produce beans, for example.
Cucumbers, squash.
Yeah. Pumpkins, if you want, if you got the space.
I did that one year with my kids and put them in the wagon and walk up and down the neighborhood and sell them.
Yeah, by the way, you two have had experience in pawning off excess vegetables with neighbors who have grown tired of them. Yes.
Yes.
Lock the door when they see you coming.
Food banks will accept garden produce if you have excess produce.
Thank you for mentioning that. Ampleharvest.org is a great website to go to find the food bank, the food pantry nearest you that will take your excess produce on a regular basis. Whenever you have excess produce, ampleharvest.org, you enter in your zip code and it'll tell you where those pantries are near you. You may be surprised. Like when I went to it after moving here, I discovered there was one just a couple of blocks away.
Wow.
So that's nice.
Yeah. And a good use for your produce and helping people out.
Yeah, use it. You grew it, now eat it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's always nice if somebody in the house is the chef who wants to gather, or you can gather it for them if necessary, but just come up with recipes for all that. And preserving the food, too.
One thing that is relatively easy to grow and that I really appreciate, especially having a smaller vegetable garden, is growing my herbs. Basil is an annual, but I have sage in a pot. I have oregano, thyme, marjoram.
Parsley?
Not any at the moment.
Okay. Parsley's a biennial.
It's a biennial, right. And I get the timing wrong. So if you get the timing right, it'll last 2 years. But I get the timing wrong, so I keep having to replant it every year.
The parsley does last over winter for 1 year, but the second winter, well, it
blooms.
Yeah, it blooms and then it gets ready to die.
Yes.
But it's still harvestable in that second year despite the flowers. And I like to leave it on there with the flowers because it attracts beneficial insects.
Yes, that's one of those that attracts us, the mini wasps that don't sting humans but eat bad bugs in the garden.
That would be something else, too, to consider, too, when you're gardening is don't be in a rush to tear out those plants, because a lot of them, especially the cool season plants that you might put in, the lettuces, the cabbages, the broccoli, the cauliflower, and the others that like it when the weather is cool, they'll tend to bolt or develop seed heads as the weather warms the following spring. And you may go, oh, I better get rid of that. It's getting bitter. Well, leave the flower heads for the bees.
And I have arugula now that is growing actively right now, and it has flowered and seeded around. And so then the arugula patch gets bigger. So I'm doing two things. I'm allowing it to flower and allowing the insects to feed on it. And I'm getting seed that is germinating. That doesn't happen with my parsley. The seeds aren't germinating, but sometimes you can get 2-for-1 punch.
There's a lot of good information online about establishing a garden. There's a lot of poor information online about starting a garden. One of your best resources, and as I'm fond of saying, all gardening is local. Choose a resource that's based near you, and that's usually a university or a college that has a horticulture department or a master gardener program, a cooperative extension program in your county or state. So basically, ending your online search about gardening with the letters .edu is going to bring up results on the first page that have been not only tested, but verified.
Yes.
As opposed to some people out there who just are following the advice of their grandmother, as well intended as it may be.
And yes, you don't know. That's the problem. You don't know what's good or bad, but the colleges do test it before they put it online.
Right. .edu. And .org, in the case of some botanical institutes, botanical gardens and things, have a lot of good gardening information as well.
Yes. If you're an aficionado of a particular type of plant, begonia grower or something, org would include societies of people that know a lot about those things.
And probably locally, too. That's the other thing, too, is join a local garden club.
Yes.
Hang out with the master gardeners if they have a garden, a public garden, and get answers from them. If your neighbor can grow it, you can probably grow it, too. That's another thing I always say. If you're just thinking about what plants can I grow in my yard and you just moved to an area, walk your neighborhood. Strike up conversations with somebody who's obviously spent a lot of time in their yard working. They'll love to show you their garden.
Yes, they will. Yes, they will.
They will try to give you plants.
Yes.
Yes. So take advantage of that, for heaven's sake. I'm done. Are you done?
Yeah, I am.
All right. All right, first garden. It's a fun experience. You're going to enjoy it. Get the whole family involved. It's a lifetime hobby. It's good exercise. And like I said, the healthiest food you can eat is the food you grow yourself. Debbie Flower, thanks for your help on this one.
You're welcome, Fred.
Want to leave us a garden question? You'll find a link at gardenbasics.net. Also, when you click on any episode at gardenbasics.net, you're going to find a link to SpeakPipe. You'll find it in the show notes. And when you bring up SpeakPipe on your computer or smartphone, you can leave us an audio question without making a phone call. Or you can go to SpeakPipe directly. That's speakpipe.com/gardenbasics. You want to call or text us? We have that number posted at gardenbasics.net. It's 916-292-8964, 916-292-8964. Email? Sure, we like email. Send it along with your pictures to fred@farmerfred.com. Or again, go to gardenbasics.net and get that link. And if you send us a question, be sure to tell us where you're gardening, because all gardening is local. Find it all at gardenbasics.net. Garden Basics with Farmer Fred comes out every Tuesday and Friday, and it's brought to you by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Garden Basics, it's available wherever podcasts are handed out. For more information about the podcast, visit our website, gardenbasics.net, and that's where you can find out about the free Garden Basics newsletter, Beyond the Basics. And thank you so much for listening.